Hello and welcome to the second webinar in our pain relief series. My name is Triana and I'm a health fitness specialist at 388 in NYC. Today we are going to be discussing the ankle joint. As we go through the webinar, I want you to think of pain relief as it pertains to movement. Think of walking, running, jumping, lunges, and squats. Now, if you have any potential injury concerns, please consult with a doctor. After the webinar, we'll go through a short movement break and have time for Q&A. Let's get started. All right, so the ankle. I love talking about the ankle because I think that it's a neglected subject. You know, sometimes we have pain in other areas and we never think that it can stem from the ankle. But think about it. What could you do without your ankle? What kind of movements would you be able to do without your ankle? But to fully understand the ankle, it's important to discuss the foot. Now, the foot bears all of your body weight and absorbs impact of force. More specifically, I want to address the arch of the foot. So let me just come here. All right, so when standing, the arch of the foot provides strength and stability by redistributing weight to all points of the foot. So if you look at this first photo here, you're gonna see what a high arch looks like, right? You see that gap, right, between the floor and that arch of the foot. And then you have a normal arch here, right? So not as much of a gap. And then you have a low arch, or what they would call a flat feet, where there's barely any arch at all. Furthermore, the arch is designed like a triangle. If all sides aren't holding their weight, it can affect the position and the mobility of your ankle. Let's imagine for a second the motion of walking. As your heel strikes the ground, it transfers force throughout your toes and propels you forward. Now, that would be the ideal scenario, but everyone stands differently, and depending on your arch is how your walk is going to be affected. So a neutral arch promotes proper ankle alignment. Keep that in mind. A neutral arch promotes proper ankle alignment. Now let's dive into the anatomy of the ankle. So the ankle joint is a synovial joint located in the lower limb. It's formed by the bones of the leg, that's the tibia. Now, if you look here, right here, you'll see the tibia, and by the fibula, and that's the bone on the outside of the leg. So both the tibia and the fibula join together at the talus, and that's the true ankle bone. Now, functionally, the ankle bone is a hinge type joint. So think about open and close. But more importantly, what I want you to think about is the action of the ankle. And that is dorsiflexion, where the foot is getting closer to the shin bone, and plantar flexion, where the foot is coming away from the shin bone. So when you think of plantar flexion, I want you to think of lift off. And when you think of dorsiflexion, I want you to think of landing, right? So those are the mechanisms of the ankle. Let's move on. Ankle trauma. Now, ankle trauma can occur from a host of events, and I'm just naming a couple, right? So you have tripping or falling. Now, usually that's a scary thought. Nobody wants to trip or fall. And sometimes we can't actually catch ourselves. So like, for instance, my sister, she was getting out of a car one time and there was a dip in the road. She didn't see it. And not only did she trip, but she fell and literally broke her ankle, like on both sides, right? So it's a very scary thought, but this is something that could potentially happen. And tripping or falling can twist the socket out of its normal position. Then you have walking or running on uneven surfaces. Now, uneven surfaces can affect the distribution of weight when standing. Now, this is tricky, right? Because it depends on your environment. I live in the city, and if anybody's ever been to New York, you guys know that ain't nothing even in New York, right? But, you know, somebody might live in a place where it's flat everywhere. But the most important thing to think about is that you align yourself, right? Or prepare yourself for your environment. So I know where I live, so I know I have to prepare for uneven surfaces. Also keep in mind the type of activity you doing, right? So if you're training on gravel, if you're hiking, if you're doing tennis on a field, like all these different things will affect your ankle. Then you have incorrect landing from a jump. I know. How often are we jumping, right? But think about it like this. Pretend you see a snake on the floor if you live in Florida, and then you have to like jump on your partner or something like that, right? You still have to jump, or it may not be a jump. It may be a hop, or it may be a bound, but there is a potential for that. Or think about being by a puddle. You might need to jump over a puddle. So these are realistic, real life situations that may cause you to use those landing mechanisms. So incorrect landing from a jump will definitely affect your the position of your bone in its socket. And then you have alignment deviations of the foot or ankle. Now we're going to kind of go back to that the arch of the foot. Deviations can occur from unbalanced arches. The foot may become pronated, and that's where your feet come inward towards the midline of your body, or supinated, where the foot leans on the outside of your body. When this occurs in the joints, the other joints like your knees, your hips, and your lower back have to compensate for your foot's poor position during walking or running. This can lead to instability that can potentially cause injury. Now, I personally love to run. And I think my problem has been in the past that I just like want to run so bad that I'll just take any sneaker that I have and I'll take them and I'll run. But then what ended up happening is I started to get this pain in my hip, and I couldn't figure out why I was getting the pain in my hip. I thought I would get a pain in my knee before I get a pain in my hip. But that ended up to cause compensation because then my other hip had to take on or bear most of the weight for me not being able to use my other hip. And from that point, it caused a shift in my spine and caused lower back pain. So we think sometimes that all these things are not connected, but like I said, sometimes the ankle is a neglected thought. We don't think that the ankle can affect us in this way, but I'm to show that it definitely can. All right, so let's move on. Now we know how ankle trauma occurs, but now it's about the why. And I think when you think about this, it's more about, is it the chicken versus the egg, right? If you go back to tripping, falling, landing, did you trip because you had an ankle issue, or did your ankle cause the tripping, right? So there are different reasons for ankle issues or ankle trauma. One of those can be lack of mobility. Now, ankle bones are held together by a number of ligaments, which are fibrous tissue that connect bone to bone, especially in the ankle. Now, ligaments don't contain a lot of blood vessels and take significant time to heal. So let's go back to that landing from a jump, right? Now, when you're landing from a jump, think again about that dorsiflexion. Your foot is getting closer to your shin. But now, if all the muscles that help this mechanism happen aren't functioning properly, then when you land, you might have an issue. You definitely might go into a landing position that it can cause other issues in the body. Then you have restrictive tissue. Now, lack of range of motion in the ankle can affect your performance. Ligaments connect to bones that connect to tendons, which connect to muscle that ultimately help you move. So if you want to break down some of those muscles, right? So you have your Achilles tendon, right? And so that is the tendon that connects your calf to your heel. That's something that really affects your ankle, and if it's restrictive or if it's overactive, you're going to feel that in your dorsiflexion or your plantar flexion. Then you have your soleus. Now that is the bottom portion of your calf muscles. So if that area is tight, guess what? It's going to affect your gastrocnemius. and that's the top portion of your calf muscle. And then it goes above to your hamstrings and potentially your glutes. So again, restrictive tissue can stem from ankle deviations. Now, if these muscles are overactive from long-term improper position, think about wearing heels, right? So if you're wearing heels every day, your foot is always in that plantar flexion position. And then you're getting overactiveness in your Achilles heel and your soleus and your gastrocnemius. So again, if these muscles are overactive from improper position or underactive from lack of muscular activation, your performance will suffer. And then lastly, we have joint inflammation. Now, joint inflammation, that can happen from a lot of different reasons, but we can stick to landing or jumping. So because it's a synovial joint has synovial fluid, and that fluid is what coats the bones in the socket. Now, if you're constantly having impact from jumping, hopping, whatever the case may be, you're going to wear down that fluid within that joint, which will cause joint inflammation, because what's going to end up happening is that those bones are going to start rubbing together. And quite frankly, we just don't want that. And then when you think about ankle related issues, you guys may or may not have experienced them, but some of them are plantar fasciitis, shin splints, patellar tendonitis, and lower back pain, as I discussed earlier. My favorite parts, ankle health practices. So first and foremost, again, if you believe you have suffered any injury, please reach out to a doctor for further diagnosis. Now, when it comes to ankle health practices, I really want to stress the importance of wearing proper shoes. And yes, I can tell you what shoes to wear, but what's most important is your foot. You got to know what kind of arch you have, right? Do you have a high arch? Do you have a normal arch? Or do you have a flat arch? Figure that out first, and then figure out what type of activity you're doing. The shoes that you wear in the gym are not the shoes you're going to run with. The shoes that you wear running are not the shoes you're going to hike with. The shoes that you hike with are not the shoes you're going to play tennis in. So you have to keep those things in mind. And you definitely should have different shoes for different types of activity. Also, you want to make sure that your shoes fit you, right? And you want to make sure that your laces are tied properly to give you that ankle support. So like basketball players, they usually have like high tops because that's going to give them more ankle support. Following along, stretching and warming up before activities. Super, super, super important. Like I mentioned before, ligaments do not have a lot of blood vessels. So it's even more important to stretch and warm up before activities. And you can do that with that plantar and dorsiflexion, going up and down with the ankle. Next, we have strengthening surrounding muscles of the joint. Again, super important, especially if you don't want that restrictive tissue. And then think about overactive muscles and underactive muscles. You want to strengthen the muscles that surround the joint to keep it stable. And this is one of my favorites. Practice balance with single leg exercises. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. One of those reasons is something we call proprioception. And that's just kind of where you are in space. So when you think back to tripping and falling, it's like, well, did you know where you were? And were you able to gain that balance back? Now, also what you can practice with the single leg exercise is arch building. And that's where you plant your big toe, your small toe, and your heel into the ground. And that is going to cause that gap in between the big toes and the heel, forming that arch. Super important, very easy to do. You can do it at home or anytime. And then lastly, I always like to mention that prevention is the best cure. However, if you do feel discomfort after activity, general practice is RICE, and that's rest, ice, compression, and elevation. So let's keep those things in mind. All right, so now that we've gone through the health practices, I'm going to take you through a movement break. So before we go into our movement break, I'm going to just say thank you for joining me today. Now, if you want more information on the foot, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel to visit the pain relief series. And also in there, you're gonna have more exercises for your ankle. After we do the movement break, we're gonna open it up for a Q&A. So let's get started. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and I'm gonna reposition my chair so you guys can see me. If you guys don't mind, I'm gonna move. You guys can follow me. All right. I want you guys to see my feet. And you know, with technology, there's a lot of trial and error, but I think that works. Okay, great. So the first thing we're gonna do today is we're gonna do ankle circles, and we're gonna do that seated. So you wanna bring one foot, let me move back. Okay, that's better. All right. So you wanna take one foot, and we're gonna go into 4 directions. We're gonna go north, south, east, and west. All right, so if you can't do it with me right now, just, try to remember for later on. All right, we're gonna do 2 rounds. All right, let's get started. North, right? So that's that plantar flexion. South, dorsiflexion. East, and west. One more time. North, south, east, inward, west, outward. Let's switch sides. Now, as you do this, I want you to feel the surrounding muscles. So as we point north, you're going to feel contraction in your calf muscle here. As we go south, you're going to feel a stretch in your calf muscle here. And then east and west, you're just loosening up that ankle joint. All right, let's do it again. Point out, point up, east, and west. So that is a great warm-up for you to do before any activity, whether it be running, walking, squatting, strength training, you can do that. Next, we're gonna do more strength training, right? Or some muscular activation. And we're still gonna be seated, and here we're gonna do seated calf raises. So the starting position is your heel is gonna be off the ground. And you're gonna feel that contraction here in your calf muscles. Hold it for 2, 1, 2, and then bring the heel down. We're gonna do that 4 more times. Up, squeeze, and back down. 3 more times. So this is good for warming up because we are practicing that dorsiflexion and that plantar flexion. And this is also activating your calf muscles. Let's do 1 more. And bring it down. All right, so next, I gotta move my camera. Follow me along here, people. We're gonna do a standing calf raise. So now we're adding a little bit more load in comparison to the seated calf raise. The same movement, but just more load. So from the side, you're gonna lift off. Now, try your best to position your feet like a tripod or like a duck, right? You wanna make sure that your big toe is planted on the ground and your little toe. This is something I always have to work on. And bring it back down. So you're gonna bring it up and bring it back down. If you need to hold on to something, by all means, do it. But see, my big toe always leans out, and that's always been a problem for me. So this is nothing new. And we're all human. So keep in mind that we're always gonna have to constantly work at it. It's not something that just fixes overnight. And last one. So when you see a problem, fix it. And release. All right, to finish off with our movement break today, we're gonna do a single leg balance. So you're gonna take 1 foot off the ground in this position. Now from this position, now if you need to hold on to something, like I said, hold on to it. But I also wanna practice the arch building. So here, you're gonna really try to press your big toe into the ground. I know you can't see with my shoes on. And then we're gonna plant the small toe into the ground, right? You're gonna feel Your heels lift up a little bit. Try to bring that heel back down into the ground. And hold. We're going to be here for about 20 seconds. I hope you guys have 20 seconds. Now you're also working on your proprioception, right? How you handle being in space. So it's super important. Less than 10 seconds. Press that big toe in, small toe, and heel. Now, if you need to gain balance, you can bend that standing leg just a little bit. Less than 5 seconds. And release, opposite side. I'm planting my toe in, big toe, small toe, heel. Let's get it. "20 seconds on the clock. Now I'm starting to feel something here in my outside of my calf. Pay attention to these things, you know, kind of feel what's happening with the body as it's happening. Good. Less than 10 seconds. I'm leaning. Got to catch myself. And relax. All right. Guys, we're done here with our movement break. Now I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, go for it. Let's do it.